Good morning. Thank you, Shaheen. I just want to take a second to thank the organizers of Startup Boston Week. You've done an amazing job. So many sessions, so many people involved, coordinating everything. It's really impressive. What I wanted to do is ask the folks online to use the chat function and give an indication of whether you're a student or a professional looking for a change. What's your kind of your status that would give an indication why you wanted to come to this particular session. So we'll just wait a second for the results for that.
None yet.
None yet.
All right. Well, in any case, hopefully you're in the right session. My name is Andy Wilner. I'm a managing director and co-founder of Cadence Consulting, LLC. We engage, our clients are businesses. We engage them to help them solve the problems that are keeping them up at night. We engage with their teams directly to tackle those high impact problems in product development, quality, business systems, even hiring. One of our hallmarks is leaving teams stronger than we found them. So not only do we work to solve the acute problem, we also do training and leadership development to help prevent problems from recurring in the future. The panelists today are Eileen Alawi, founder of the People Project, Alex Mims, head of talent acquisition at Iterative Health, and Allison Spruill, VP of New Globe. VP of People at New Globe. Pardon me. What I'd like to do is just ask each of you to introduce yourselves, tell a little bit about what you and your organizations do, and then we'll get into the questions that we prepared to guide through the panel discussion.
Go first. I'm Eileen Alawi, and I'm a, seasoned recruiting professional who took a chance and started my own business about 4.5, almost 5 years ago. The People Project is geared to work with early stage companies, pre-seed, seed stage, Series A, and I really help companies and organizations identify, okay, what's the first layer of hiring? How do you budget for salaries? How do you recruit? How do you tell stories to get people interested in a company that really has no notoriety? I have a personal passion towards helping female job seekers find the jobs that they really need, want, deserve, and helping them get the salaries that they deserve. So that's kind of my passion and something I like to focus on additionally. Happy to be here.
Awesome. I'm Alex Mims. I'm the head of recruiting at Iterative Health, which is a health tech startup in the Boston area and Cambridge specifically, focused on sort of solving the various or applying AI and machine learning to solve some of the different challenges in diagnosing and treating GI issues that folks have. I sort of grew up in tech recruiting. Now I cover all kinds of recruiting through the work that I'm doing, but have spent just a lot of time interviewing and hiring folks. And yeah, I've been doing it for, I guess, more than a decade at this point, which is crazy to say.
Well, somewhat of a copy and paste with Alex, except now I am on the people side currently. So I'm Allison Marina Sproul. I have recently joined New Globe, which is an ed tech company that is very much not a startup. We jokingly kind of say that we're in the teenager phase of our life cycle because we're not quite scale up, and we've been around for 15 years, but just started there in July. New Globe partners with governments in developing countries to bring technology and curriculum into public school classrooms. So really phenomenal mission. And we do have separate people and talent acquisition teams there, but previously for the last 5 years, and having just joined New Globe in July, I've been the first people and talent hire at startups. So recently in health tech at ConnectRN as their first people in talent hire. And then before that at Cozykin, a childcare tech. And yes, that is an industry startup here in Boston. Started on the talent acquisition side, but in my first TA role, it was really more than TA. There was visa processing, there was training, there was onboarding. And so after spending quite a bit of time strictly on the talent acquisition side, when joining the startup world, getting to wear many hats, I've gradually made the transition to more of a fully people-focused role. That's about me.
Great. All right, why don't we dive right in? Allison, if I can direct the first question to you. How can I determine where to find specific startup opportunities and which jobs to apply for?
Yeah. So ultimately, when you're thinking about what jobs you want to apply for, I think about the different stages of a startup, right? And I think about them in your jungle, your dirt road, and your paved road stages. So at the jungle stage, you're probably seed funded, maybe Series A, right? And you've got like just a handful of folks in the room, or not the room, the jungle, right? We're painting the picture here. So maybe once you get your seed funding, you're armed with a machete, so you can start cutting your pathway through, right? And you're starting to work your way towards an MVP. Once you reached your paved road stage, you've got your MVP, maybe your Series A, Series B, and you know what the pathway is, but it's still pretty bumpy, right? At this point, you've already probably determined what some of your core standard operating procedures are, but maybe they're not quite what they should be yet. Processes may still be pretty manual, so you want to start to pick up the steam knowing that you do need to scale, right? So you're first building in the jungle stage, you're scaling in the dirt road phase. And then finally, when you're late stage, Series D or pre-IPO, you've got this wonderfully paved road. You all know where you're going. You've got the same goal. You're going in that direction. And it's a fairly smooth ride because at this point, you're just optimizing the process, right? And so when you're thinking about your day-to-day of what, sparks joy, Marie Kondo style, do you think about what you enjoy as building, scaling, or optimizing? And I think that will help to determine what level or stage of company you want to join, but also to an extent, what type of job you want to apply for as well. And with regards to where to look for them, at least in my experience, I've found that, networking can work for really all stages, but ultimately, if you are looking for those earlier stage companies, really looking at job sites like WellFound, which is formerly known as AngelList, can be really helpful. Also looking at Y Combinator, also looking at different venture capital portfolio companies' jobs on their pages, PE firms and their job pages. That's what I would recommend.
Great. Eileen, did you have a follow-up comment about that?
No, I mean, I think that's, well put in terms of kind of like looking at the landscaping, trying to understand which stage you're really interested in. I think that networking is definitely a huge bonus when it comes to early stage. Like if you're looking to get into a company that is, you're going to be one of four, one of five. Very rarely, I think, do you find those jobs posted. I think that it's really like getting in the trenches of networking within the startup community. And there are definitely some networking groups within Boston that can help with that. But I think just being active on LinkedIn and kind of looking at the chatter, looking at Crunchbase, seeing, what companies have just received funding, what companies, are going up for funding. And I like what you said about checking out like VCs. That's a great avenue that I think people definitely don't take advantage of, and it can be hugely beneficial when looking up, startups that have money and are going to be able to pay you for this job.
Stability.
Yeah.
All right. Alex, what's the difference between working for a startup versus working for a more established enterprise?
Yeah, I think Allison sort of did a good job of talking a little bit about it because, early days, you may not even have a product, right? You may not have a story, you may not have any funding, you definitely don't have, any revenue coming in most cases. There's no process. Whereas as you get later in the startup journey or truly working for a corporation, things have been figured out at that point. Most things have been figured out. It's still not going to be perfect. It's still not going to be, an ideal state in most cases. But once you are joining a late stage startup or a corporation, you're joining somewhere where there is structure, there is process, there's red tape, for lack of a better term, for good or for bad. Roles are really well defined. Whereas you join that stage, early stage, Series A, Series B startup, you may have a title, but you're doing that and probably about 20 other things as well as the company figures out, how it's going to make money, what the products are. Oftentimes has to pivot in various ways in those early days. So you have to be really, really flexible and willing to sort of go on the journey. Whereas corporation, you usually have a pretty good idea of what you're signing up for.
Okay, let me ask you to just follow up on that. What sort of personality traits and work styles lend themselves to working in the startup world?
Yeah, I think you have to be really flexible and comfortable with, not having a process, comfortable with not having any type of structure in some cases, in not knowing who to go to or who has the answers. A lot of times nobody has the answers or you have to figure out the answers yourself. So there's certainly a degree of flexibility and comfort in not having all the answers, in there not having, not being structure in place for you. And I would say you have to sort of be able to take on a little bit of risk as well. I think we all are seeing this in the talent market right now, but startups are struggling. A lot of companies are struggling, but startups particularly are struggling because they don't necessarily have tons of money in the bank. And so you do have to be comfortable with a degree of risk or potential instability that comes with working for a startup.
Yep. Either Allison or Eileen?
Oh yeah,
further.
I mean, I think that I think scrappy is an overused term when it comes to startups, and it's like, what the hell does scrappy mean? But that scrappiness is like you're totally comfortable with ambiguity, and you're comfortable seeking out the answers and not waiting for somebody to say to you, yes, I believe that that's a great avenue to take, with this project. You just do it because everything is moving so quickly in an early stage company. And I think that I've seen the personality differences. I've recruited for BCG. I've recruited for, a 5-person startup before, and those two couldn't be more different. And the personalities that fit well in those two environments are night and day. It's very cookie cutter, this type of corporation where you know exactly how long it's going to take for your next promotion. You know exactly where you stand. Everything is very process based. And then you have an environment where, you could be hired and 6 months later you could be promoted. 6 months later, your job could completely change. And you have to just kind of be all in with a high energy level. I feel like energy is really important at a startup as well, because there's going to be so much change. I think that positive energy kind of lifts everybody up. So.
Okay, great. So what can a candidate do to stand out in the hiring process? Knowing that, how do you portray yourself in the best light?
I think going to add on to what both Alex and Eileen were saying about going beyond just the comfort factor of navigating the ambiguity and being willing to find the answer, you also need to just get it done. Or as my people down south say, get her done. But, you need to be really action oriented. You can't just sit on your hands when you're in a startup, because if you don't do it, nobody else is, right? So the question, repeat one more time. Sorry.
Yeah, so no, you've done all of you've done a great job describing, what the environment is like as an employee in a startup. So if I'm going to apply to a startup, how do I project that I want to do that?
I've been running on fumes this week. So when you are needing to position yourself as a scrappy ninja or rock star or llama or whatever ninja, weird things startups are saying and calling jobs these days, you want to lead with data, right? That goes in your resume, that goes in your interview. Maybe not so necessarily in networking, because nobody wants to hear about you had 73% cost savings at your last company by changing this one thing, right? Like, but if you're in an interview or that is on your resume, that's going to show that you're a doer. You're going to not only get things done, but you can articulate the value that your action has. So put in the stats, use your numbers.
Yeah, that's when we train people on interviewing, we're always talking about the difference between claims and evidence. And everyone can walk in and say, I'm a people person. I get stuff done, but the evidence just speaks volumes. Eileen, you had a comment?
Yeah, I would love to just share a practice that when I'm hiring for my clients, I also very much so gain a relationship with the candidates that are going through the process. And so I prep them for their interviews. We debrief. And one of the things that I have found to work really, really well is, through the interview process, these individuals, these candidates are learning more and more about the problems and, okay, what would my role actually be? What are some of the struggles that you guys are having right now? What are some of the biggest problems that you're looking for this person to solve? And I always have them ask that question. And then based on whatever the answers are and the things that they learn after maybe 2-3 interviews, I have them put together a solution and present it. And, especially for startups, this works really well. It's like, let me give you a taste of what it would be like if I actually worked here. Like, here's an example. I'm already coming to you with a solution. This isn't asked of me during an interview, but I went home, I had some thoughts about our conversation, and I thought of, a path that you guys could take or a solution or, and that seems to work really well.
Yeah, demonstrating initiative is certainly going to be viewed really positively. Let's talk a little bit more about the interview process. People often get the advice of, find out who the hiring manager is. So what's the purpose of finding out who the hiring manager is? And should people kind of tailor their answers on the interview depending on who they're talking to in the organization? Allison, you want to lead off on that one?
Sure. In short, yes, right? So I will say I have some hot takes on cover letters, having recently gone through my own job search for several months earlier this year. By the way, shout out to Alex. She makes a great recruiter. Gave me very high quality feedback on some of my interviewing. But ultimately, we really want to make sure that we are tailoring it to the process. And yes, it can be annoying to have different sets of resumes and having to do different cover letters, but there's this crazy thing now called ChatGPT, right? It's all the rage. So don't let ChatGPT write your cover letters verbatim, because that will not look good, right? It'll sound very generic and not you. You want to then use it as a baseline and go back, edit it, make sure that it makes sense as it relates to your individual candidacy and this particular company from what you've gathered online, right? But you don't want to spend so much time putting into the cover letter. You do want to make sure that maybe you've got 1, 2, I'm going to say 3 versions of your resume tops based on the roles that you're applying for. Because if you have more than 3, you really haven't determined what you're actually looking for yet. So in my case, in my recent job search, I was pretty open, but I knew that I specifically wanted to be on the people ops side of HR as opposed to the talent acquisition side, even though a lot of my former career had been on that side. So I applied for everything from people partner, senior people partner, director of HR business partners, and now I'm VP of people, right? So ultimately I had more of a people leader resume, but then I also tailored it such that noting it's a strange and kind of fine line between, yes, I've been in a leadership position, but I'm open to an IC role. Anybody else had to do that dance before? I feel like a lot of like principal tech recruiters are like in that zone right now in particular. But having 2 different resumes to highlight with the data orientation definitely being strongest on the leadership side and more of a humility angle on the other one can be helpful.
In terms of, and AI, I think is definitely something that should be used as much as you possibly can during this process, because it's a stressful process. So like, take any resource that's at your fingertips and use it. And for cover letters, absolutely, at least use it for a base and just like, change some of the wording to dress it up afterwards. But if you're applying to a few jobs, like, you're right, you don't want to spend all that time like painstakingly writing a cover letter that some people won't even read. A lot of people won't even read. And so in terms of really like tailoring the interview or yourself or your presentation towards the hiring manager, I think that it's egos during the interview process can definitely be stroked a little bit, because that person is going to be making the decision about whether or not they're going to hire you. So absolutely find out more than you possibly can about this person. Like, dig in a little bit. LinkedIn is there for a reason. Find out where they went to school. Anything that you can kind of relate to them in any way makes you stand out. I mean, that's all there is to it. They're meeting with 6 people in one day for the same job. The person that found out that you like the same sports team, and you can like have a little side conversation about that, will stand out.
I just want to temper that comment a little bit, because there's a fine line between informed and creepy.
LinkedIn.
You just say, stalk people.
Yeah, you don't start looking at their social media or
Yeah,
anything,
so
but
that's
more
what
like
I mean.
professional.
Knowing their favorite sports team and then having it naturally come up in conversation is one thing. Leading with it is a completely different thing.
You have to
Some
do the
finesse.
professional creep.
Yes, professional sleep, definitely with some finesse.
Okay. Okay, so we've talked about where to look for jobs, startups versus corporations, the personality traits and comfort with uncertainty. Let's take a different perspective. If I'm a job seeker, how do I really evaluate if there's a real opportunity? Is this a legit opportunity, a legit organization? How would you go about assessing that? Alex, you want to start us off?
Yeah. It can be tricky, right? Because if the startup, has worked with Eileen, they have a really good story to tell, right? They can tell you all the awesome stuff that they're doing, the great products that they have. And so it can be hard to figure out, is this real? Is this something that's going to fall apart in 6 months' time? So there's a lot of questions you can ask. If they will disclose it, try to understand a bit about their revenue and or profitability. Some will not necessarily disclose that to you early on. Understanding a bit about their runway, how much money they have in the bank. They're probably not going to tell you exactly how much, but they might say, hey, we are good to go for the next 2 years or 6 months. That can sort of help you understand how much risk is actually there. Understanding what products are out in the market today, what the feedback has been on the products, how many customers there are for whatever the product or service is. So you can start to build a picture of, where is the business at in its life cycle? Is it really early where there's no customers and there's no revenue? Or is it a little bit further along where they're starting to iterate, starting to pivot, starting to think about sort of what's next for the company? So I'm sure these two have some other ideas, but those are a few of the ones that I would start with.
Yeah, that's a great start. I think that finding out historically what that founder's history has been from starting companies before, have they had big exits? Have they had success? And not every founder is going to have that history. You might be joining somebody who's just as fresh as you are at looking for a job with the startup for the first time. And I think that definitely finding out their purpose, digging in, alongside runway. I always think that any company that's over 10 people already, finding out what the runway is really, really important, because you could be taking a huge risk in joining something that might not have any revenue to pay you within the next year or so. So yeah, I think digging in, getting those answers, and looking into the founders' history in terms of startups
Yeah.
can be really helpful.
Yeah. So to follow up on that, Allison, what are the different ways I might be compensated as a startup employee? What's the difference between salary and equity, and how do I go about evaluating whether an offer is a good one?
Yeah, so thanks for asking that. Ultimately, when you're looking at your offer, it's not just cash compensation, right? So you have to think about the total rewards package, which can even include non-monetary things like flexibility to work from home. That can dramatically impact the cost of your commute, childcare necessities, things of that nature, right? So there's like the dollar related parts of the total rewards package, and then like the non-monetary things that can actually make a pretty big impact on your spending as a family. So of course there's your salary. I think that one's pretty straightforward, right? But we also have to think about the benefits package. And so, like I just alluded to, the ability to work from home, is it hybrid? Are you fully on site 5 days a week? If you are going in, right? Is there subsidized parking? Are there commuter benefits, right? Also have to think about how much of the health, dental, vision insurance, if offered, is the company paying for versus you as the employee? Are they also covering any portion for your spouse or your dependents, right? Some companies have really fabulous packages where they'll cover the full cost of that insurance for you, your spouse, and your dependents. So I know from my last company, for example, we paid full health, dental, and vision. And for the family plan alone, on just the health insurance, that was about $27,000 a year in savings. So if you're thinking unilaterally about, oh, I have an offer for 90K at this company, but 75K at this company, and the 75K salary comes with a benefits package where all of your insurance is paid and you've got a ton of equity, you really want to give that some serious thought and calculate the actual numbers of how much will I be paying in insurance costs, because in that scenario, you'd actually want to go with maybe the 75K option because you're ending up having more money in the long run. And then finally, and I alluded to it, you've also obviously got stock options. So I have to give a little disclaimer that I'm not the greatest person at explaining when it comes to equity, but you've got stock options when, in many cases, when applying to work for a startup and receiving an offer from a startup. And those all have vesting schedules. So what's important to know about a vesting schedule is kind of similar to if you've ever had a 401k. In most cases, not all, most cases, there is a 4-year period with what's called a 1-year cliff. So if you accept a job at this startup and they say, we're going to give you 40,000 stock options with a 4-year vesting period and a 1-year cliff. In most cases, if you do not complete that first year of employment with the startup, you will get 0 stock options to be able to exercise or purchase. You don't outright own it unless you exercise or purchase those stock options, then becoming your stock. They're no longer, options at that point. So important to think about some of these things. It's not tangible money yet, but that's how you see all of the really wealthy entrepreneurs ending up making a lot of money, because they started really early stage or were a founder or an investor and then sold their stock later on once the company had gone public. So goes really back to your risk tolerance, like we were talking about earlier. Equity can be extremely meaningful, but the earlier the company is, the more risk you have in that stock option becoming valuable in the future. So just some things to think about.
The other thing I would add with equity generally is that while it's definitely a lottery ticket, that's like the best way that I can
Yeah.
try to talk about it. It's a lottery ticket. Sometimes you win that lottery and sometimes it's worth nothing. But given that it is a lottery ticket, there's also tax implications that come with equity.
Important.
And it's really important because it can end up costing you a lot of money. Now, it may be costing you money because you gained a bunch of money, but it's something that you certainly want to think about. If you have like a tax advisor, if you have someone that does your taxes regularly, it's something you want to consider because it can sort of change the dynamic of your tax situation in a pretty considerable way, depending on what that equity is. If it's stock options, like incentive stock options or non-qualified options or RSUs, it's all different. So just a little like asterisk on that to understand that it is a lottery ticket, but if they are worth something, there's tax implications there too.
Okay, so we're going to try a little experiment next. We wanted to, bring to the audience some insights about how to negotiate the best possible offer, especially knowing startups are likely cash strapped compared to larger companies. So we're going to do a little role play here. Eileen is going to be the candidate interviewing with recruiter Alex.
You're in for a treat. You want to start?
Yeah. So let's assume that Eileen has been made an offer. Eileen, your offer is going to be $75,000 and you're going to get 1 million shares of equity.
1 million shares of equity seems like a really awesome offer. However, I have no idea what that means. And so I think just a caveat too before we go on, one of the things I always encourage people to do during this stage is the person that you're talking to might not be the best person to explain equity. And you'd be surprised at how many people who already work for that organization have no idea how to explain their equity.
Yep, that's true.
So you should always ask, like, who's the best person to speak to about this? It could be the founder. I mean, depending on how small this is. And you should be having that direct conversation so that there's no confusion and that you're really, really clear on like what that 1 million shares actually even means. So without having you go in to break it down, I think that's wonderful. Being a part of this organization and taking a bet that this company is going to grow and be successful, especially now that I'm joining it, is something I've been really looking for, that investment. However, the salary it's not meeting my needs from a comp perspective. In terms of where we can kind of make up the gap, is there anything we can do in terms of adding more shares, possibly creating a flexible, work week? What levers are you willing to pull for me?
Well, Eileen, we do have other candidates that we've been talking to. So, I hesitate. We think this is a really, really fair offer. So I'm curious sort of why you're concerned, that it's a lot of equity and we think 75K is actually higher than what we should be paying, but we're pretty excited about you.
And I am very excited to join this company. I'm leaving a bonus on the table at my current company that is a significant portion of my yearly income. And I know that you guys are looking to fill this seat very soon. I know you guys are going up for funding soon, and I know that this is going to be a pivotal role in helping you guys present well at that investor meeting. So I really, I know cash is not an option. Where else do you think you could just make me feel like I've made the right choice in terms of coming to join you?
Eileen's really good at this, guys. I'm trying to be a mean recruiter, but she's asking really good questions. So I hope you're taking notes.
And giving a reason why, which is so important. It's like, don't just say, I just want more money. It's like, well, why? And give like a really valid reason. Okay, look, you guys want somebody to start in a week or so, 2 weeks. That's fine, but I'm going to be leaving like, maybe $25,000, $30,000 on the table because I'm not going to be able to get my bonus for the year. And so a company should kind of, if they really want you, that is a very valid reason to kind of up the ante a little bit to seal the deal.
Well, what we could do in this case, Eileen, is we could leave the offer as it is, or we could, bring it down to 70K and give you 1.2 million stock options instead. So you get it sort of a choice in terms of what you'd like to do here.
And in terms of like a flexible work environment, which to me is really, really important. And I know you guys are at the stage where you have been able to offer that to a few people. Is that something that we could talk through?
We could. What do you have in mind?
All right, can I ask you to pause there just in the interest of time? Unless you have some very specific points you want to make. I
was going to say a 4-day work week is something people are leveraging like crazy right now, and people are getting it. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, so I think that was fantastic. The bringing in that concept of total compensation. It's cash, it's benefits, it's equity, it's flexibility, and trying to find a common ground, that solution, a win-win solution. Fantastic. So what I want to do is for the last prepared question, and then we'll open it up to the chat and the audience. I just wanted to ask the panel to speak to the name of this session. They've made me an offer. Should I refuse? Eileen, what would cause you to refuse an offer?
I always like to remind any job seeker, the number one reason that people leave their jobs is because of their manager. Not because all of a sudden I don't agree with the mission of the company. Sure, some people do. But the number one reason that people exit roles and leave jobs is because they really just don't get along with their manager. Their manager makes them unhappy. And so in a startup where there's just a few of you and there's a lot of one-on-one attention, on top of all that autonomy that we spoke about, which is very important to be willing to accept when you join a startup, you are going to be working with this person often. And so really, really make sure you get along with them. And if for whatever reason they have been off-putting during the process and everything else kind of checks the boxes, if you're like, I just really am not sure about this manager. I mean, it depends on what situation you're in terms of looking for your next job. But I really like to stress, make sure you want to collaborate with this person because they can make your life hell or they can lift you up and carry you through this next part of your professional career. And so I think that is that's something to really just keep in mind.
Yeah. Alex, why would you reject an offer?
I will caveat this by saying I know this is a really insane market out there. I know a lot of people have been looking for jobs for a really long time. So you may be like, there's nothing that would make me reject an offer right now. And that is a totally valid answer. You may only be accepting for 6 months, a year. You don't have to accept assuming you're going to be there for the rest of your life. So I will put that caveat in there, but also consider if you have other offers and you're sort of weighing things, there is a stat out there that 9 out of 10 startups fail. Now, that doesn't mean they fail in the first 6 months and they just fall on their face and they fold, but most startups really don't go anywhere. And that's okay, right? You may get some really great experience out of that, but keeping that in the back of your mind, knowing that something that you've been building and working on may very well turn into nothing a few years from now, that's a really hard thing to accept, I think, for a lot of people. And so if that's not something you're comfortable with, it's not something that you can really wrap your head around, you may want to refuse the offer.
And kind of going back to what we were talking about at the very start of the panel with the determining what jobs you should apply for and thinking through that early on, I also thought about this from the lens of outside of what would spark joy, just culturally at a company, what are my kind of hard stops in the job search? And so for me, right, I wanted to make sure that whatever level of role, whatever industry, whatever stage of company, similar to what Eileen was saying before, that I was reporting to somebody, didn't matter if it was the CEO, the founder, a director of people who had 5 years less experience than me. None of that mattered as long as I felt a mutual trust and respect with that hiring manager. Full stop. It's so, so important. So I think we need to reiterate that. right? Being able to have the trust and autonomy to do what you've been hired to do is essential. And then secondarily, at least for me, I'm incredibly passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and was able to build out a lot of programming at my former employer in that area. So I knew that if I was going to a new company where the leadership team didn't hold that same weight as me, that I probably just would not be the right culture fit for that organization, right? And if that works for that company, that's okay. But it is something that I personally am very passionate about. And that may not be the case for you, and that's totally fine too. But you need to find out what are your kind of cultural hard stops, right? So for me, it was being able to have autonomy and trust from whoever I was reporting to, and the ability to have an equitable space for folks and employees, you know, of all genders, ages, ethnicities, et cetera.
Great. All right. With that, thank you for all those insights. We're going to turn it over to the audience for questions. We'll start in the room, and then we can move to the chat.
So the way I kind of wanted to proceed with this was doing a virtual question first.
Okay.
So, let's see. Somebody first asked.
I did see very early on in the chat that Mary asked for me to repeat one of the sites that you can apply for jobs. So it wasn't a W, it was the letter Y. So Y Combinator is a good place to look for jobs other than Well-Found. Y Combinator.
Thank you for. You have really good eyesight, by the way. That's not small font.
That
is small font. Is what I'm trying to say.
I'm doing a bit of
letter, not
squinting.
WHY.
Yes,
Yeah.
correct. Good clarification. The letter Y.
In our in-person audience, get your brains churning for any in-person questions you may have. But one off the bat right now is, how important is equity really? It seems like it's a good deal, but if the company never IPOs, is it worth anything?
It can be. It can be. IPO is not the only way that equity becomes worth something. If a company gets acquired, it can be worth something. Sometimes there's a secondary market as well. Sometimes your equity agreement tells you can't sell in that secondary market. So keep that in the back of your mind. And then the company can do, the term's going to escape me, of course, but the company can sometimes allow you to sell equity back, and you will make a certain amount off of that. So there's a few different ways that the equity can become worth something. It may not be
like a cashless exercise.
No, I'll think of it. It's gonna come to me probably after the session. But there are a few different mechanisms for you to make equity worth real dollars. And it may not be the private island kind of money that you were expecting, but it doesn't mean that it'll be worth nothing. You may be able to cash out and get 20, 30, 50 grand in some cases, may not be millions, but there are other ways other than an IPO where equity becomes worth real cash.
Okay. And anybody in the room have a question?
No, I'm going to bring in the microphone, sir. Please say your name.
Hello, my name is Hussam. I'm a scientist. I work in biotech pharma, and I'm trying to find a job. So a lot of the suggestions that you guys have spoken about, I feel like it's hard to apply to pharma because usually they're more likely to fail than anything, and they're hardly ever profitable until they actually make it through clinical trials, which is 5 to 10 years. So is it really the options worth it in that case, honestly? Because it's such a long time. And yes, they get seeds over and over again, but they're just burning money. So where's the cutoff?
Hard question.
I think that's a personal
Yeah,
question,
that is.
honestly.
I was just going to be like, I would love to counsel you particularly on this because it feels like your heart is very torn in terms of the avenue you've chosen. I mean, have you been through this? Have you worked for a company that
Yeah.
just
They're still not profitable.
okay? All right. So this is the most recent role that you left. You might have just found out that that is not suitable for you, right? That type of environment. And that's not to say a startup might not be suitable for you, but and you're educating me, maybe us on pharma a little bit more than I've worked a little in bio, but not specifically pharma. And gosh, I mean, if that's the pain that you're signing up for, yeah, that can be a struggle, knowing that, look, we're not going to get, especially if you're joining them like in the beginning, it's going to be 5-10 years before we see anything. Like, let's all just realize that we're all laying down on our swords for the next like 5-10 years. That's hard, really hard.
And-
You need a lot of equity, and I don't know. I mean, I would say like if they can't offer that, like make sure they've got the cash in the bank to pay you to make it worth it. It's your job at the end of the day,
Yeah,
right?
I would say another thing to consider is, kind of your life circumstance, right? If you can't wait 10 years to get a paycheck, that's a real big factor in decision making. You can get a lot of really excellent experience at an established company, build up a nest egg, and then take the risk. So you can get tons of skills. You can, learn the craft, learn the trade, depending on the company and how it works. You might see more or less of the business side or the chemistry side or whatever you want to do, and have a steady paycheck in the meantime. So, there's options besides startups, certainly in that industry.
The other thing I would say about pharma that's, I think, a little bit unique is that oftentimes you're working with a novel molecule. So like that doesn't go away. So maybe it's more than 10 years that before you're finding a use for it, but perhaps having that equity, maybe it pays you out in 15 or 20 years because the molecule itself is useful. We just haven't found the use for it yet. And some big pharma company like a Merck is going to say, you know what, that seems kind of interesting. We're going to buy that. And so it may not ever be that the company becomes profitable. In pharma, it's a slightly different path. And I don't know it as deeply as some probably do, but you have to think about it slightly differently. Whereas like tech, it's lines of code, it's a piece of software. Those just die all the time. Whereas pharma, it's slightly different.
Very cool. Okay, another question we have is, in evaluating an offer, how can you tell if your on-paper equity stake could be diluted by a future round of investment?
Just ask.
Yeah.
Usually. They're usually
Top there again.
Yeah.
Like find out you're having that conversation with the person who has established the equity for the company, and knows all the fine print.
I would say
that's a real
yeah.
worry. Like that can happen.
You also usually get about 10 or 15 pages of fine print and legalese when you get an equity agreement. So make sure you read that in detail or have someone who understands it read that so that you do have an understanding of what exactly it says. Because while, equity can be similar across companies, all of those really, really small details can change company to company. So make sure you understand what you're actually signing up for.
And just a plug for carta.com. They have a lot of free resources to educate folks on equity and the different types of equity and all the nuances that come along with it. So definitely recommend checking them out.
Got another one from the chat, or should we go back to the room here?
Yeah, no, it'd be another. Do we have any questions in the room? I surveyed a little earlier and noticed not.
We got one in the second.
You have a follow-up?
I think.
Okay.
There's one in the second row too.
All right, let's go over here first.
Thank you so much. I have a similar question with this gentleman. I kind of like continuing my previous job, which is like the company was running out of the budget, so they had to cut the employee. So right before I start working for that company, I tried to introduce with the other organization who had the money. So they kind of currently now my school adopted that project. So I'm kind of like go back to my graduate. I wanted to go back to school to be in the graduate school. Then because they in my school now adapted that project, I wanted to ask the school how I can like be a good fit for that work, because I know how I was working on that field because it's a kind of international NGOs. So it's a kind of a developmental programs. So I wanted to part of that project again, and then what, because my school is adapted, I also wanted to be in the graduate school program. So what kinds of equity should I ask for the school, and then like how can I also reestablish my my work environment because it's kind of like a cool new technology for the, especially for the least developed countries, to promoting that kinds of developmental engineering concept. So it's a good as an learning, I mean, we're working environment, and then also for my graduate, it's also a new venture to create some values for biotechnology, repurposing the waste. There is a lot of things I see the possibility to expand the project.
I'm not sure I followed the question element of it.
Yeah, can you give me back the mic?
Yeah.
In the interest of time, can you give me a one sentence question that they can address? That's always good background, but it's hard
Okay.
to understand what you need.
How should I reintegrated my field engineering work with my and then going back to graduate school?
So you brought a project to the school that you're currently attending, and you're finishing your undergrad, and you're looking to join a graduate program.
I already graduated a long time ago with my school,
Mhm.
and then started working on a field for almost 3 years.
And now you want to go back to get a master's. I'm not sure how your school works or how that program works, but absolutely go to them, ask for time in the admissions office, and find out who the right team is to talk to and do a presentation. Sell yourself. I mean, this is like a form of interviewing in a way, right? But talk about the value that you have brought to the school already with this project, and how you think that you being in this master's program would be beneficial to all. I think that just pulling together the facts, being able to vouch for yourself, speak for yourself, and I hope that's answering the question that you were looking for. But I think like getting in front of the right people, selling yourself, and making them give you this opportunity. That's how I think you could get there.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, so we have 2 more questions that we want to get to, and we can knock these out pretty quickly, actually. So this one's for Eileen. Eileen, you spoke about how people are asking for and getting the 4-day work week. Does that mean that they're getting 32 hours of work expectation a week, or are they making up for that 5th day during those 4 days?
Whew. Well, in a startup, there's definitely no cut and dry amount of hours that you can expect to work. Let's just say that. There's no clocking in, clocking out. And if you do have that type of mentality, go work for a large corporation, that you'll be happier with that, right? Because you're going to get Slacks at all times of the night. You're going to get emails. So I would say the expectation is you're offline 1 full day. That's what it is. Now, if you're making up that time on other days, so be it. But these people, it's very clear, like on this day, I will not be responding to email. I will not be attending meetings. This is my day. I have this day. And it is working, especially for companies that just want that talent, but do not have the cash runway to be able to pay the talent that they want. This is such a great piece of leverage. And you guys have read about it, I'm sure. 4-day work weeks are like blowing up all over the place. So startup mentality is really adopting that. And it's at least it's my advice to you, just ask. Because if you're coming to the negotiation table already, they want you. They're not going to say, oh my God, this person just asked for a 4-day work week. Forget it. We don't want them. Let's start from scratch, because that's so much time that they do not want to spend. And they've already established they want to hire you. So at least ask. That's my advice for everything at that stage. The most they're going to say is, no, sorry, we can't give you that money. No, sorry, we can't give you more equity. Sorry, we can't give you a 4-day work week. At least ask.
Can't get it if you don't ask for it. That's what I've
Right.
learned in this life. Okay. And our last question is going to be, when a company shares that their runway is X years, how can you assess the validity of that number? Basically, how can you pry a little bit deeper? What follow-up questions can you ask to make sure that they're giving you a straight answer?
One thing that you can start with is just trying to contextualize that, because, they may say, hey, we have a 10-year runway. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean in our current state? Is it a 10-year runway if we cut the company in half? Is it a 10-year runway if we start to hire a lot and grow like crazy? Is it a 10-year runway if we expand into different countries? Like, what does that actually mean? They may not want to tell you our 10-year runway is X million dollars in the bank. So just trying to understand, when they say that, what do they mean? Is it a 10-year runway if only the founder is left at the company? So just understanding a little bit more. Some companies may, at this stage, at the very end of the process, tell you how much money they have in the bank. They may disclose that information to you, so you can ask. They may say they won't tell you, but that's okay. And then I would say also understanding just what the revenue looks like. If there is revenue, what does it look like? And is that built into that runway? Is the runway just money in the bank? And starting to understand a bit more. But a lot of it is dependent upon the company and what they actually want to disclose to you at that point.
And if they do give pushback on the disclosure too, if you're really wanting to be candid with them, you can offer to sign an NDA to, help to calm some of the nerves there.
I think that transparency at that early stage that's going to be a telltale sign of the environment there. Like,
Absolutely.
if they're shady AF and they do not want to tell you, like maybe we just move on, If you're taking this huge risk and you're joining this early